There's no such thing as sight reading. And when performing a skill, like music or any other, the only information that is usable and accessible to you is information that you have stored in your mind. Having a reference source is irrelevant. If you're driving a car, you can't be looking up in the owner's manual how the brakes work while you're driving the car. You have to know that information before you begin performing that skill. So if you're cooking and you're following a recipe, you're not demonstrating your ability to cook. You're demonstrating your ability to follow a recipe. If you know how to cook, you wouldn't need the recipe. It's the guy that wrote the recipe that knows how to cook, but even to follow a recipe requires stored knowledge. You have to have information in your brain in order to follow that list of directions. First of all, you got to know how to read. You have to understand how measuring utensils work. You have to know the difference in a tablespoon and a teaspoon and what a cup is. You have to you have to know what the list of ingredients that are labeled. You have to know what those ingredients are. This is all pre-stored information. You have to know how an oven works or how a stove works or how a grill works. But you're not demonstrating your ability to cook. You're demonstrating your ability to follow this list of directions. If you're doing math and you're following an algorithm, you're not demonstrating an understanding of math, you're demonstrating your ability to follow that algorithm, to follow this list of pre-provided instructions. That requires pre-knowledge, but you're not actually understanding math, you're just following directions that have been provided for you. So the reason that it's important to test music students' reading ability at auditions and concert and sight reading competitions is this is how we assess the amount of knowledge that is stored in the student's mind about music. How musically educated are they? Because the first time you read a piece of music, the song may be new, but if you're musically literate, most of the content of the song is not new. The song is going to be made up of existing scales and chords that are recognizable visually, that have predictable spellings and predictable sounds that you've probably, if you're musically literate, learned before on some past piece of music or some past fundamental. So this is the first time I played the song, but the first time I played these scales and chords was a long time ago on some other song, so I'm not sight reading them. I'm just reading them. They're already stored in my mind. The rhythms are mostly going to be made up of rhythms that we've learned before on some previous piece of music or some previous fundamental. So I've never played this song before, but I'm not sight reading these rhythms because I already learned them a long time ago on some other song. When reading a piece of music for the first time, you are dependent on information that was previously stored in your mind because the only reference source you have is that information. This is how we find out how musically educated the students are. If they're reading a piece of music for the first time and it's made up of scales and chords and rhythms that they don't know because they haven't learned them, then they're going to fail. And it only works the first time that you play the music, because the second time you play the music, the first time you played it becomes the reference source, right? So the first time, though, the information that's stored in your mind is the reference source. And so if there's no information stored in your mind, well, then you can't sight read. If that information is stored in your mind, well, then you're not sight reading, you're just reading information that you already learned on some prior piece of music. In some areas now, they have changed the definition of sight reading, which demonstrates what I've said all along, that there's no such thing as sight reading. If there were, you couldn't just continue to change the narrative. But now at the competitions, they are allowing the bands to actually rehearse the music. The judges leave the room, and then the bands actually get to rehearse and play the pieces for like 10 minutes, and then the judges come back. And so now sight reading no longer means the first time you read it, and it also doesn't mean you've read it, but then the first time you play it is the sight reading. Now, the first time you play it for the judges is the sight reading. You can play it 5 or 6 times, and then the judges come in, but none of those 5 or 6 times count. And so this new narrative masks the problem that a lot of the kids haven't been taught how to read. They're not musically educated. And so instead of rigging the test to mask the fact that the students haven't learned how to read, wouldn't it be better to just teach them how to read music? My name's Mark Dooley. I've been a private music teacher for 36 years, focused on practical theory and music literacy. If you'd like to hear more, follow me. If you like lessons, contact me. If you can learn how to read words, you can learn how to read music.